right, as Jesse had said, my name is Joe Rankin. I'm the head coach at Bettendorf High School, and we are going to go through the LD topic overview for Nationals 2026. And this is Jesse's company here, and he is running the summer online prep program there with information. I did post in the chat the different website logins and links that you can check out. But I know that this video that Jesse is now recording will be uploaded to the Dog of War YouTube channel, so you can download that and watch that or any of that later on if you so desire. And I also put in a link to his website, which is also there on that screen there, and a link to the camp information, which is that QR code right up there. So just as we're getting things started, just to let you know that. So today, though, we're going to hear and talk about the LD topic overview for Nationals 2026. I'm going to be presenting some information and conveying some thoughts. Jesse is going to man the chat, so if you do have any questions, please feel free to put them in there. I do believe we're having that transcribed as well, so I know that one thing we tend to do is if something comes up and people are talking about it, sometimes we do throw some links directly to evidence or arguments that you might pull from, and so sometimes that chat would be beneficial right there as well. So, but either way, I am not going to be able to see that chat, so Jesse's going to man it, and we will stop periodically for some questions or just at the very end, if you have anything, do make sure that you check and, ask because there's no bad questions, folks. All right, so in terms of things, what I always just like to start with is just to make sure that we are aware of what we're talking about, right? And that is the topic. And if you're unaware or if you're just unclear on how that all functions, the topic that was chosen was democracies ought to prioritize the protection of civil liberties over national security. And that is voted on by the people, so 776 coaches and 2,683 students voted. And that is what we ended up with. So I do know that they do always have that kind of poll. I don't know if all the programs actively participate in the vote. I know as a coach I tend to, but my students haven't really ever fully engaged on that. But it's just another layer that I kind of like to talk about because the National Speech and Debate Association does make sure it's something that, whether or not it's your favorite topic in the world, you do get to have a say in that. And that is, one of the reasons why I think it's kind of a good thing that we have that ability. And so we're going to be going through this topic. Before we get into that, I did want to go over exactly a little bit more about how nationals works, especially to those of you who are going for the first time. And, as a student, you only get to go a maximum. Well, I suppose if you had middle school, it's even more. But as a high school student, you get to go 4 times. And, as a 21-year veteran, 21 nationals, and Jesse, I believe, is at like 16 himself, we've seen quite a bit. And Jesse is one of the people who gets to the privilege and the honor and the pain in the butt sometimes to run at the tab room at the national tournament. And so he has access to, the data from that. And so it's interesting to look at a couple of things, especially as we talk about how to prepare for nationals, because this tournament is different than others. You have to already have been qualified before you even know the topic. You have to start prep right at the end of the school year, going into summer. You have to travel there. And, there's just a bunch of different variables. You're not going to multiple tournaments unless you do some of the online prep tournaments or, scrimmages from other schools. And so it is going to be a little bit different. And so we just wanted to go over that data first, just to kind of get your head around how this functions and how it's just a little bit different than everything else. So looking at data from just last year's Nationals, which was in Des Moines, and this was the 2025 data at the beginning of round one from across the entire country. There were 288 students from 235 schools from, around the world, obviously mostly in the United States, but we're also talking about all of those outreach programs like in Taiwan and other places that started in round one. So 288 total people started round one. And the first break is at round seven. So we'll talk more about that in just a second on the next slide, but that's the first opportunity you have to break. And it takes that number down from 288 and went all the way down to 65. So that's a little bit less than 25%. And that was from 55 schools who advanced from round seven onward. And from there, that 65 goes all the way to the end. And we'll talk about how that functions on the next slide as well. But also equally relevant is that the pool of judges are 346 different judges from a total of 289 schools. And the way that Nationals now works is that a judge does have to commit to a particular day and a particular event, and they're usually in that pool for the entire time. Just it depends on what day they are and what kind of rounds that they're in. And so what I really want to stress here for anybody going to nationals for the first time or any amounts of time is that you are going to have a wide variety of competition and judges. And it's not just about are they, a circuit person or a local only person or any of that kind of stuff. Like you can lay the labels on as you like, whether they're lay friendly or, whatever. That's just a wide variety. And this tournament, unlike other bigger tournaments where there's going to be a lot of people like Glen Brooks or Minneapolis or insert your big TOC monster tournament, there are no judge preferences. There are no strike sheets. There are none of those things. It's just luck of the draw, and who you get is who you get. And the only detail that you may have there is there used to be a national judge info sheet, and I don't think that's still the case anymore. I'm not 100% sure. But otherwise, the only thing you have is the paradigm that's listed on Tabroom. You can't change your judges, but you can look at that paradigm on tabroom.com and you can check out their information. And sometimes that information is super relevant and very current and been updated. Other times, maybe it just says parent judge and you're done. Or maybe it just says, coach of a program and done. Or, even a long-term coach like myself, I have been guilty of not updating my paradigm every single year, at least as fully as I could. So, in terms of like your information available, it's going to be kind of difficult to know what your judge is going to do or what the judge wants or advocates or desires because that information is kind of limited. I would also just caution a cautionary tale of that even if a judge's paradigm says something like, I can handle speed, that statement I've had over the years, and I've had all kinds of different places in terms of local to TOC and beyond, that doesn't mean the same thing to you as it does to them. And so just kind of understanding what that means is it's kind of a variable. And so like talking with them before the round starts is something I always recommend. But in terms of the rounds, just for those people going for the first time, just realize that there are six guaranteed prelim rounds, and every prelim round is going to have two judges. You don't know what those two judges are until Sunday when they release everything, and they do, I believe, release all six prelim rounds all together. But you'll know what two judges are in your round, and you can click on their paradigm and check them out. Once you, and I hopefully you do, get past the prelim rounds, they do have three judges in each round after that for the elim rounds until they get to semifinals where they'll have five, and then the final round will have nine or more. It does depend heavily on that. For semifinals and finals, they do ask judges now to put their name in the pool to see if they want to do semifinals or finals. I've been in the semifinals pool a few times over the years, and I've been in the final pool a couple of times, but I haven't been chosen for the final round of nationals as a judge. But they do tend to have more experienced judges, higher end judges that have had usually they want two diamond coaches or more, which means they've had 10 years of experience minimum and a certain amount of points for their team. But they do have a variance on that front. So you're going to have a different kind of judge, a little bit older, typically, a little bit more experienced in those final rounds or semifinal rounds. Whereas in the other ones, it's a little bit more of a, see what you get kind of thing. Because some states, they might have LD all the time every weekend and do 24/7 kind of thing. And other places, it might just be one more event that they're going to throw a kid into that they don't normally have. It's just hard to say. Now, in terms of the breakdown, as I said, everybody is guaranteed six prelim rounds. To advance, you have to have eight or more ballots, period. So you have to have eight of the 12 total ballots out of your prelim rounds. And that means that you could get 2-0 or a 1-1 or an 0-2 in that round every single time from prelims. The disclosure is not really required by the NSDA. Sometimes they often say don't. Some judges do. I have found it both ways. So like even if the tab room tells them don't disclose or something, I've had judges disclose. So, but I wouldn't guarantee that you're even going to know ahead of time how many ballots you have. In my experience, I've had some years where students know exactly where and what they have, and others it's a big question mark, and that's always really nerve-wracking. But in terms of the overall tournament, I will say that for the most part, the NSDA would prefer that they don't tell. So that way, when they do reveal the advancing codes and advancing people, they can have a little bit more of a show of it. So I'm not exactly sure if you're going to know in that tournament whether or not you're winning or losing the whole time. And I've had students who know for a fact in their heart of hearts they won and they didn't, and vice versa. So I wouldn't say you'll know until you get that round 7 and 8 posting to see who advances. But once advancement does occur, beginning in round 7, it's double elimination from that point forward. So the moment you have two losses, you're out. And so that could go on until the very end of the tournament, but that's how it works from there. So my general thoughts in terms of this part of just like preparing for nationals is read paradigms as best as you can. Sometimes they'll be super helpful, sometimes they won't, but at least you can walk in with a little bit of knowledge, and that's going to go a long way. And I would always advocate for asking before you start the round. You have two judges, and sometimes they're going to be the exact same style. Sometimes they're going to be totally, again, on plenty of panels where I could not see a way that the round went the other side, and I was a split decision when you look back at the rounds. So there's a lot of things that can happen there, but you need to ask. And if you don't ask, you're never going to know, and that's just going to help you out. I would advocate always for writing multiple cases for each side, just so that way you can have the arsenal ready to go. And the modular style case would probably be good. So, hey, if I can do this particular type of argumentation I prefer, I have it ready to go, but I can also adapt it to another style if I need to. So that way that you always have that ability to modular and adapt as needed. But adaptation is going to be something key for nationals, and it really is the luck of the draw. You could get every judge the type of judge that you love every single round, every single time, and go 12-0. Awesome. You could also get the exact opposite, or more likely, somewhere in the middle. So the one thing I would say though is that it is highly unlikely judges will be from your normal or local circuit area because there's so much variance. If you are a team that does travel where multiple states often go and those kind of things, you might have the ability to see a judge that you might recognize and those kinds of things. But generally speaking, these are going to be judges from other parts of the country, world that are generally not people that you would see on a regular basis. At least that has been my norm when I've had students. So just realize that adaptability is going to be key. In terms of the topic, and I do have it up here at the top on the slide every single time, just so I'm reminded. And that also just helps to break things down. So the first thing I'm going to do is go over some definitions. And I know that this is going to be, kind of cookie cutter on some of these words kind of things, but I also like to always show like there's some different variants and what kind of things can actually be. And so in terms of democracy, I just threw two of them up there. But when you're looking at this, one of the biggest things I found with students, especially from areas of the country that don't typically do as much LD, is that they often confuse democracy with the United States. And the United States is not just what this topic is going to talk about, even though I too will be talking about examples from the United States. And because I'm more familiar with them, I'm more familiar with history classes from America's perspective. It doesn't make it the only thing. Like you can find democracies all over the planet, and there are all kinds of different types of democracies as well. And so you're going to have to make sure that you are really aiming properly at these things, especially for a wide variety of judge pools. And so when you're looking at this, you could do something as simple as government by the people, or you could get into a little bit more detail there with that Georgetown definition, or many other ones out there. But there are going to be some nuances here that you're going to be utilizing. I've always been a big fan in Lincoln Douglas debate of making sure that you're properly talking about or making sure that you and your opponent are aware and your judge of what exactly you're talking about. And this kind of definition analysis has always been crucial. And it's kind of fallen by the wayside in more recent LD, but I do like to have good, solid definitions to make sure that things are going through properly. But you can check out those kind of definitions. Odd, of course, is going to be key for some of your cases if you're going for any kind of moral authority kind of aspect or trying to get out of a moral authority kind of aspect. And so if you do just express obligation or you have some kind of moral imperative, just having the definition in case ready to go, whether you're affirmative or negative, is going to be kind of critical because it could be a way to get a hold of a certain judge's ballot, especially if they are more flow based and believe in that, if there is no fight on the definition, it's going to be true kind of thing. So if you are going for that moral authority, it might be a good idea here. Or if you wanted to supersede moral authority, having a definition ready to go into kind of make sure that that's locked in or taken out is going to be pretty critical. Prioritize is going to be probably kind of important here because especially on the negative could just say like just do both perm kind of thing. And the prioritization is where it's going to go because nowhere in the resolution is it saying just do one. I mean, no country could do just one of these two things. It has to happen no matter what. But what prioritization occurs is really going to matter. And so there's some simple definitions there, making sure that you have something on the books that you can check out and, just to make sure that they understand what that means in the round itself. The civil liberties definition is kind of interesting just because of what it all pertains. And this, of course, is going to be changing depending on your definition. I mean, even in this definition here, it talked about the First Amendment of the Constitution, which is, of course, related to the United States, and it might differ by democracy. And so having a broad enough definition that covers what you want to cover especially when you're talking about like surveillance kind of things and those kind of deals where it would probably matter because that is a violation of some civil liberty in some way, shape, or form. It's going to be pretty critical in my mind to make sure that that's clear about where the line is in terms of civil liberties, in the sense that these are the ones we're actively trying to engage and protect versus these are the ones that are inherent and not really, or maybe even not part of this definition or this particular topic area. It's going to be important in my mind to make sure that that ground is clear so that way they can provide the impact analysis later on that's going to help you win the round or lose the round for that matter. But you're going to need to make sure you have that. Now, national security, of course, is going to be probably a big definition because it depends on what you mean. It's very different from just like protecting the homeland kind of thing, all the way to, counterterrorism and foreign relations. And so, depending on how broad of a spectrum you wanted to go down, this is going to be what you want to cover. So, are we talking about espionage again, or are we talking about like sabotage of, nuclear power plants or nuclear facilities in some type? There's a whole lot of ground there that could or could not matter. And it really depends based on your definition of how you're doing. Now, this is really critical in my head when you're talking about cybersecurity and its civil liberty implications because there's all kinds of things about violating someone's, uh, you know, intellectual property rights or like their own safeguards that they have as an individual through cyber attacks. And that is going to be like another layer of this debate from a tech front that will, where does national security end and civil liberties begin kind of deal. And so that is going to be in my head a pretty critical argument here at nationals when you're prioritizing one over the other. Now, just to kind of start off, and this is a Jesse special here because he is a former social studies teacher, so he does much better in terms of like the background information than I would. I do remember those classes, but I was not, teaching them. I'm an English teacher, and so going through things, it's a little bit different. But in history, just as a broad sense here, democracy has had these competing things since the beginning of time, kind of thing. They try to protect individual rights, giving us civil liberties, the right to vote, the right to act in certain ways, the right to own property, but they also have to make sure the state is preserved, otherwise there's nothing there to protect them. And so there's that age-old social contract that you have heard a billion times in the past and would be a good starting point for the value criterion, which we'll get to in a moment here. But that has always been part of the idea of democracy. There's going to be this give and take versus individual citizens versus the government itself. And where that line is drawn is going to be something that we always have in a democracy because it's something about a balanced approach that we try to have. Now, in terms of America specifically, here are some things there about the founding fathers. In terms of the Federalist Papers, they pushed for this idea of national defense and making sure that the nation state preserved itself, where the Anti-Federalists warned of the expanding power of the government and how that would be just as bad as England and how they were in power for the whole time. If you don't know what I mean, just go watch some Hamilton. The songs are much better. The effects are pretty good. So I'm pretty sure that that would be a better thing to do. It's on Disney Plus. Have a good time. But that is really a true statement, though. They had this balance approach in trying to have this infighting about what was the best way to do things. And we still do this day, for that matter, because of the states' rights versus the federal government versus, what you can do. We see it every day in the real world. It just plays out a little differently. We also have the Constitution, which has rights that are guaranteed. I mean, it's called the Bill of Rights for a reason. And you can see that, at least for our country, those are the ones that we are saying are the most important for the civil liberties aspect. And yet, we still also have an executive and congressional power for war, which, in the real world, we're seeing right now, and we have in the past as well, about what power is allowed from the central government to do acts of war and for how long, and when it needs to be curbed by congressional power in order to, end or continue it. And so we've had this struggle in our own constitution, but it's built by, it's built on purpose. So that way we have that check and balance system, which also makes us a flawed democracy, technically speaking, as opposed to a full democracy, but that's another conversation. The American Civil War is also an execution of that executive power overriding core rights, like do we have the right to do our own thing or not? And then that also became into this time where civil rights were they a conditional privilege, like are you born with these rights or do you have to earn them in some way, has been something that we've had for quite some time in our country. And some are natural rights and some are prescribed rights from the government and given by the government, and they can also be lost if we do bad things, like if we commit a crime we lose certain privileges, and if we even if we make restitution, some states don't give all of those rights back. So there are different things that have conditional rights, and those have been debated as well for quite a while. But it also goes to show that when we're talking about national security versus civil liberties, there has been, at least in our country, times where those civil liberties are not paramount and above different things. Other rights have superseded them in the past. And so when you look at more recent history, we can go back to World War II and see that the Japanese internment camps were starting off by individual suspicion, like, hey, I think that one person might be a spy for the bad guys, into, well, might as well group all of them and put them into a camp. That was something that happened, and it did have a historical precedence, which was, and I'm going to butcher the name, I apologize, but Korematsu versus United States, that when there is a military necessity, it can override the rights of even Japanese American citizens. And so we do have some historical precedence that says that national security could override civil liberties. Whether it should or should not is going to be part of the debate, but we do have that historical precedence that we can look at, and we also have that entire thing that we can see both sides because it's been quite some time for this at this point, like what, 60 years? So we have some historical breakdown of what happened, good and bad, that we can use as evidence throughout this. We also have the Cold War with McCarthyism about, the whole, are you a commie spy, that kind of deal. And we also have surveillance and blacklisting of individuals, which happen where we would just watch them as a country putting our national security over their civil liberties because we were watching them. I wouldn't think on security camera, but probably listening to their phone calls, watching them go places, physically tracking, etc. And then it got all kinds of fun after 9/11 with the Patriot Act and FISA amendments and expanding surveillance capacity. And I do think that this is going to be one of the places that the current topic in the current world could really focus on because of the digital tracking. And I know we're talking about democracies in this particular resolution, but the technology, especially in some of the things I've seen in states like China, are just incredibly insane about what they can do and track and how they use the surveillance in order to dictate how things work in their society. I would say that democracies tend to not want to go that far, but I would also argue that, when the tech exists and we are using it in some ways, it's still going to be quite the impact in the round. And so I do think the surveillance state would be a decent thing to research as we move forward into this topic. Now, in order to get into the framework argument here, like one of the biggest things I always talk about in Lincoln Douglas debate is trying to make sure at the national level with the wide judge variety pool is that you do have to make sure that the framework is simple and yet also complex enough that you can make your argument and stand out from your opponent. So it is a balancing act as always. But as with most things, we do start with the classics. We have utilitarianism, which I'm sure we all understand is just the greatest good for the greatest number for the most part. And I do have Stanford dictionary definition there for you. And this all comes down to what are we going to allow to happen? Are we going to allow the atrocity of one versus the killing of a whole lot? That's the trolley problem. Are we going to kill one and save five, or are we going to kill the five and save the one? You can always use that example. World War II was a classic with the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We justified it because we thought killing a city, even if it wasn't just a military city, it was worth the cost of innocent life because we prevented a greater evil. We did an evil, but it required us, that evil was required to prevent an even greater evil. So in terms of utilitarian and calculations, I do think that there is something on this topic that you can go to town with. I do think util works on both sides of the topic. It's a very simple, understandable one. I would say that if you're going to go this path, as always, you're going to need the numbers. And sometimes it's really hard on utilitarianism to talk about things in LD terms because you can always talk about them in theory, but you don't have as much implementation. And so it's really hard to say, I'm going to save more lives if you don't have proof that you actually save more lives when it just becomes a theoretical. It just becomes like the weather report. It should rain tomorrow. It's got a chance to, but I don't really know it for a fact. And so util calculus, I would just make sure that you have a good framing of the resolution and how it's going to go. And this might be a more historical approach because democracies have done things in the past and you can point to them and have those numbers ready to go. It never means that it's a guarantee that it'll happen the same way next time because situations change, but it would be a more empirical way of breaking things down. In terms of deontology, of course, that's the other biggest framing, and that is instead of looking at the consequences and the how many people live and die or how much does it cost versus it save, we instead look at the moral choices, and this would be, the definition of ought from earlier, but also looking at the good consequences over the morally forbidden. Like it's never good to kill a person, even if it saved five, therefore we shouldn't do it. We should not intervene in that sense and stop our actions from happening at all. Just like, telling the truth no matter what, even if there are bad consequences, which is what this lovely little graphic talks about. A husband lying to his wife about her dress, that tends to happen quite a bit. As a married man, I do tend to be honest with my wife, and I do have the scars to prove it. But in terms of World War II, we do have those civilian deaths of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which we can point at that said even if it did end the war, it was never worth the cost of those innocent lives who are dead, and we should not have done it. And so that is that moral imperative. Deontology kind of looks at that. There's always going to be that strain of util versus deon, and you're going to see plenty of classic argumentation, things that you can find in a billion different LD back files that'll talk about that going back and forth between those two ideals. But that would be the two classics that I would go with. And I don't think they're classic for a bad reason. Like it is easy, especially for a wide judge pool, to say numbers matter. Here's how those numbers impact things in this round. Hey, judge, vote for me because I do this. Just like it is easy in my head to say, hey, judge, morality matters. And here's why we agree that this is moral or immoral. Let me prove that to you. Boom. So like I don't think they're a bad framing. I do think, especially as LDers get more and more complex and deeper into the activity, they tend to try to like just make things more difficult for themselves when they should just probably at this stage with this variety of judging, with this unknown amount of quantity of experience or even understanding of argumentation. I'd rather keep it simple, stupid, and be able to connect things rather than try to go for some complex argumentation that the judge may or may not follow. You could also go for another stance of things, and this is just some version of political realism or a pragmatic approach to things. And that is just like there is a realistic action of that, hey, we can't just look at morals because we aren't a single individual with a set framing of morals. We're a country who has to represent a whole lot of people, and so we can't just do that. We can't just look at numbers because numbers are just a numbers game, and we saw all kinds of bad things happen when we only look to the majority and we harm the minority. So a political realism stance is somewhere, it's on its own stance, but it's just saying like, hey, we have to be pragmatic and realize that, yeah, we're going to be selfish because our country has to like survive in order to protect these rights that you say are important. In order to do that, though, we're going to have to look at real world impacts, not these theoretical, not these, like, oh, the world could implode by 15,000 billion nukes because, I knocked over the T or something. Like, I've heard some horrible link stories before in policy debate and other things. But real world impacts matter, and states generally are going to serve their own interests first. I'm not going to help my neighbor until I'm secure myself. The Cold War focused on military capabilities in terms of the countries, not just their intent or usage, but like how it was going to be functional and how it was going to work. And so states generally serve the needs of their citizens and prioritize survival first and foremost, which is a pragmatic point of view. You can probably see it in a bunch of different worlds, but political realism, pragmatism, that kind of deal is really going to be probably something that's going to be thrown in there. In terms of what you could actually utilize for your value, I do tend to just go for, like I said, the classic implementation kind of thing. All of the things I just talked about, util, deon, political realism, you can just use those direct, or you can go down the value thoughts of morality, justice, national security, virtue, ethics. All of these kind of frameworks are just, all are going to go back into util or deon or of some kind of way of measuring things. But you do want to make sure you have a clear way of weighing the round. You want to make sure that you have a clear idea to tell the judge this is the most important thing, and this is how we obtain that most important thing. And that is through the criterion. And the affirmative could, respect for moral duties, minimize risk, protect human dignity. All of those are going to be fine, especially if you can justify it with carded evidence that say this is what our country or our democracy itself is founded to do. And then the negative would just go kind of the other side, which minimizing harm in terms of like life and minimizing risk to rights would be what the affirmative is going for. And then negative could just go effective fulfillment of state duties, like it has a certain job to do. And the only way to do that, to guarantee it, is to emphasize national security in some way, shape, or form. And then, of course, the big fun word that people like is hegemony. If we want to protect the power and influence of our country, we need to make sure that we do the national security first, because if we fall, then we don't have any power and we don't have any security. And guess what? Your rights go bye-bye. And so that's just some general ideas in terms of the framework. I would, of course, always emphasize like keep it simple, make sure it's understandable because you're trying to get to a judge that could be a 21-year veteran who's serving up the medicine or the brand new coach who their school ended up sending someone in LD, and they found a parent who did it 20 years ago and he's ready to help out, but he hasn't done anything in 20 years, right? It could be all kinds of things like that. I've seen, speech judges in the LD pool who are there just to fulfill their school's obligation because they randomly got a kid who could go and they were the only one the school could take. So you do kind of have, even at nationals, this like very wide variety, especially in prelims. It does get more and more credible and like long-term coaches as the time goes on. But I would say just be prepared to keep it simple, stupid, and to be able to explain things. One of the biggest things I always emphasize is just making sure when you're extending things that you're talking about what this means to the round, how it affects the arguments, showing that clear clash with the opponent's side, and making sure your story is clear and being sold as much as it can be throughout the round. Now for the bread and butter kind of thing, and I'm not going to go through these too much. Jesse does have a lovely packet of information that will be coming out after this presentation is over. I believe it's set up to go out after the live broadcast and when we post this on the YouTube channel or when he posts it on the YouTube channel. But you will be having some evidence that, or at least some argumentation to go over a bunch of different arguments, and three of them that I think are probably going to be the most common, or at least the ones that you should either be thinking of running yourself or at least preparing to respond to are the three up there on the screen for the affirmative. And the first is racism because, hard to believe, but we've used national security as a way to be incredibly racist over the years as, the United States and as well as any other country. It's pretty easy to go us versus them and them being the bad guys in some way, shape, or form. And you can have that be racism or sexism or any of the isms you want. But in the end, we are violating the rights of other people, being other, otherization, particularly in the name of security. So, in order to make myself feel more secure, I have to watch those people who are different in this way, shape, or form because they could do weird things in some way, shape, or form. So, not trying to make light of it. It's actually a really big argument. I would say a lot of people like to make those critical arguments as opposed to just case-based arguments. At nationals, you can do what you want. It's always your time and such. But I would say at least having it framed in a traditional sense as a backup plan wouldn't be a bad idea for those judges who don't want to hear critical argumentation or say that we're not talking about this particular topic. And I always say, like, why are you going outside of the box when the box is right there and it makes sense to go in? So, libertarianism is another one. The sole job of the government is to protect liberty. So, do that, right? All of your arguments can link back to that libertarianism idea and to say that the government's job is to protect individuals. So, get her done. You can also say it's a check on state power. This is a bit of a slippery slope argument that if we give a little bit on this front, they're just going to take a whole bunch. However, it is something that probably has happened from time and time again in terms of historical example of states abusing power and using it to increase their power and make themselves even bigger, badder judges of character. But I would say that those are the three biggest concepts that the affirmative has. And there's lots of different argumentation you can have in terms of like what particular evidence fits under those umbrellas. But the idea is like you need to make sure that you have that strong foundation to link the contention level offense to. So I just would advocate for making sure that you have that framework down before you start attaching different argumentation to these things. But I think that all of these fronts are going to have a whole ton of evidence that you can back them up without any issue whatsoever. The negative side also has plenty of ground, which is why I kind of like this topic. It's pretty old school for Lincoln Douglas after the last few years, but it is kind of open-ended too. And this is a secure state. Basic util framework there would work. It just says ensuring the state continues. That's the top priority. Rights are less important. Prioritize national security. You could also go through that basic social contract theory. Hobbesian would probably be the easiest on that front. But in terms of that, it's lots of philosophical backing you can go through and emphasizing that give take relationship of the individual and the state, that they have a certain obligation because of the state and they have to allow certain things to occur. Otherwise, they aren't doing their part in that contract. So there's a lot of social contract stuff you could go on and make a ton of sense. Now, as always, though, there's a ton of different social contract theorists, and so that can get pretty nitty gritty at times. So make sure that you are sticking with one interpretation and understand that interpretation because Hobbes is different than, the other people as well. And so you want to make sure that you have that. And then, of course, we have this like, oh God, we have to do it now, today, or we're going to die. And that is there's a threat, and that threat is coming. And oh golly, if we don't stop that threat now, we're going to all die in a fiery death doom. That's probably where a lot of LD people end up going because this will have 15,000 extinction impacts. My favorite argument of all time was in policy debate when they said this will cause this, which will cause a space hurricane that will take the entire Milky Way galaxy and go down a black hole. And I was like, wow, who knew? Just voting would do that. That was crazy. But hasn't happened yet. Pragmatism, who knew? But in terms of imminent threat, there's going to be a lot of threats out there that you could probably list. It probably relies heavily on terrorism or some kind of backlash that occurs, but insert the threat you want and you say, look, if we don't have national security as the biggest thing, we're dead. And they have the power to kill us, and here's why. That's a pretty easy negative case as well. Again, the link story is always going to be the most important part for those, especially to a doubting Thomas Judge like me who doesn't believe that all of those crazy things in the world are going to happen. I mean, if they were going to happen, I think, Cuba Missile Crisis might have killed us off. But hey, that's just me. We've had a few of those moments, folks. Let me tell you, I've been scared before, but I'm glad that we're still here. But imminent threats are going to be a pretty easy kind of negative to write. You can even input different kinds of threats. You can have a multi-layered threat system where contention one was this type of threat and contention two was another and contention whatever, and it all leads to the same impact. So you can modularize your case that way. So that way, if you don't think the judge would buy this one because of their paradigm, you can switch it out for a different threat. But there's a lot of different emphases that you can do there to make yourself, modular.